News of the day.
Mr. Zimmerman, have you made a decision as to whether or not you want to testify in this case?
With values that never die.
There are certainly a lot of controversies or scandals brewing right now when it comes to the Obama administration.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
Dealing with the federal government is not always high-tech, and it's not always user-friendly.
The stories that matter.
This is a massive escalation in the tension here in Egypt.
The issues that count.
I don't know why the media tries to make this into a sensation. We have never hidden the fact that we supply Syria with weapons.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
He's got the red, white, blue flying high on the farm. Semper Fi tattooed on his left arm. Spend a little more in the store for a tag.
Welcome to American Heartland with Dr. Grace. I'm your host, the editor of Politics and Culture at worldtribune.com. Thank you so much for spending some of your afternoon with us. I am especially thrilled today. I wrote a column in World Tribune called Why Conservatives Should Take a Closer Look at Mike Huckabee. And I am honored to introduce the multi-term governor of Arkansas and former host of Huckabee, a very popular weekend political review show. Governor Huckabee, welcome to our broadcast.
Dr. Grace, it is a pleasure to be with you, and I was so very honored and thrilled by the column you wrote. I just hope that the rest of America is as smart and as insightful as you demonstrated yourself to be in that column. It was really terrific.
Thank you very much, Governor. You know, what I'm hearing in the grassroots is people generally like you, they trust you, but they're saying to me, you know what, Dr. Grace, I don't think that Governor Huckabee is enough of a fighter. And right now we want a fighter, and that's why we like Cruz, and that's why we like Trump. What do you say to that, Governor Huckabee?
Well, I think people maybe don't know much about my history. When I got into politics 25 years ago, it was all a fight. I'm the only one that's fought the Clinton political machine and did it repeatedly, because every race I ever ran in Arkansas was against the machinery and apparatus that Bill and Hillary had put together in that state. It was an incredible uphill climb against the wind, because most people don't know. Arkansas was a more democratic, partisan, hardcore blue state than Massachusetts, Vermont, Maine, Oregon, or California. It was the most lopsided in America, and I was only the fourth Republican elected in 150 years. So for people to say, well, I don't know if Huckabee can fight, then they have no idea the kind of battles I went through, not only to get elected, but then to effectively govern over the course of the 10 and a half years as governor and the course of 3 years as a lieutenant governor. It was a battle every single day I walked into that office.
Right. Now, what do you say to those who would say, well, look, if you look at the record, he's just another rhino, somebody that caved? How do you answer that?
Well, I know I cut taxes 100 times in a state that had never seen an income tax cut. I was able to eliminate not only capital gains taxes, but the marriage penalty. We made a lot of tax cuts that benefited families, that made it easier for mothers and fathers to raise their kids. We rebuilt the road system. We made our public schools accountable and brought test scores up in every grade. We transformed the healthcare system from a intervention-based model to one that was about prevention, lowering costs for the consumer, something that I wish Obamacare had done, but it failed and went the other way. And I fought corruption. Over the course of my first few years in office, we went after the people that were stealing the taxpayers blind, and about 17 different elected officials from the state and local level were indicted, convicted, and or sentenced, saving the taxpayers billions of dollars over the course of time from the corruption that had so permeated the state of Arkansas and its one-party partisan politics.
And when people say, well, we want a fighter, and you've said, okay, I did fight them on so many issues, and I fought the Clinton political machine, what would you do if you're going up against Hillary Clinton? What are the weapons that you would use to fight her?
Well, first of all, truth is the best weapon we'll ever have. Truth is what would cause me to get on the stage with her and ask her why she looked Charles Woods, the father of Tyrone Woods, one of the four murdered in Benghazi, why she looked him in the eye in the presence of his son's casket and promised to get to the bottom of his death, and in fact never again spoke to Charles Woods. And I would ask, Mrs. Clinton, when that phone rang 4 times from your ambassador and he was begging for help, why didn't you assemble and ask the White House and the military to send every available resource to help those people survive the night? Why did we wait 7 hours and never lift a finger or move those F-16s out of Italy that could have been there in an hour and a half? I'd love to be able to ask her why, when the phone rang at 3 a.m. at her house, she let it go to voicemail. And there are many, many other questions I'd have for Mrs. Clinton. And again, nobody knows her quite like I do. And when I hear people say, we want a fighter, I want a fighter. I'm a fighter. But the difference is, I've often said, any drunken redneck can walk into a bar and start a fight. But what you want to know is, if you start one, can you finish it? Can you effectively lead and govern? Just to say we had a fight, and boy, it was a heck of a fight. The question is, what is the result of that fight? If it means that we improve and change and get our government operating under the Constitution, that's what we need to be fighting for, not just to go in and throw some punches and never get anything accomplished. Right, I've got a record of actually governing, Dr. Grace, and that's what I think people really should want in an executive.
Right. Nowadays, what you're seeing is a couple of senators who have a very thin resume, Rubio, Cruz, and Paul, in government. They have no executive experience. You have others that have no government experience whatsoever, like Trump and Carson and Fiorina. Can you explain to the folks, why does it matter? Because what I'm hearing from the grassroots is, look, maybe it's better to have somebody with no experience because the established folks, the experienced folks, are making a mess of this country. How do you answer that?
Well, I think it's a valid point that a lot of people are making. They're just so frustrated, and I can't blame them. And I don't want to say anything disparaging about any of my Republican colleagues in the race. We've got some good people that are going to be on that stage. But I believe that what I bring to the race is an extended tenure under very difficult circumstances as an executive actually governing. That's important. It's like having a pilot in the left seat of the airplane with some gray hair, 20,000 hours of flight time, who's flown through lots of thunderstorms. You want that guy in the cockpit when you're about to fly through bad weather a lot more than you want someone who just got out of flight school. The second thing, I've worked in the private sector. I've run my own businesses. I know what it's like to sign the front of the paycheck and to have to make payroll out of your own back pocket. And then I've worked in the nonprofit sector. So I understand that some things people do because they have to in the private sector. Some things they do because you've persuaded them that they want to in the nonprofit sector. And then some things in government are a combination where you can't order the legislature to do anything, but you have to learn how to lead, persuade, and get people to agree to help bring things to fruition that they may not have thought of themselves or even liked at the beginning. And that's the art of governing. And I just don't think we can have on-the-job training for the next president somebody who has never been tested or tried in that executive role. I just think that would be a huge mistake. We've certainly seen what it is to have a untested freshman senator over the past 6.5 years. I cannot imagine why Republicans would think that'd be a good idea for us.
Right. Do you think, Governor, that Hillary Clinton should be investigated? Should a criminal investigation be launched to look into was there any wrongdoing between the work of the foundation and her role as Secretary of State? Do you think that raises flags that are so red that we should investigate from a criminal perspective?
Whether it's from a criminal perspective, that might be presumptuous, but we absolutely owe it to the taxpayers to investigate, and I believe that the former Secretary of State should absolutely cooperate with Congressman Trey Gowdy's committee. She shouldn't be able to stonewall. She should not only answer the questions. We need to know, why did you erase those 33,000 emails? Why did you have your own private server? Why did you not follow the government protocol when you knew what that protocol was? Why did you lie about the fact that you had actually multiple devices, not just one, as you claim? Why is it that you didn't fully disclose the different decisions that were being made by the State Department in regards to very specific government action that just happened to be countries where there had been very generous contributions to the Clinton Foundation? These are questions that I believe she would need to answer even if she wasn't a candidate for president. But for heaven's sakes, if she wants to lead this country, we need to know exactly her entanglements with foreign governments, her entanglements with truth, and whether or not she could be entrusted to sit in the Oval Office.
Mm-hmm. Now, Governor, right now what's on everybody's mind is the murder of Kate Steinle by an illegal immigrant who was deported several times but still is in this country. He took the life of a young woman. And the key question for the next Republican nominee is, if you become president, how are you going to secure the border, and what are you going to do with the illegals here?
Dr. Grace, I would secure the border in less than a year. And if that sounds a little audacious, let me explain. 73 years ago, we built a road between British Columbia and Alaska. Those are tough weather conditions, and we had the limitations of engineering that existed 73 years ago. That was a 1,700-mile road that was built in less than a year. I've simply refused to accept that a country that could do that 73 years ago couldn't take care of securing the border within a year under the technology that we have without the kind of bad weather conditions that would be evident in a British Columbia to Alaska road. So here's some specific things I'd do in addition to securing the border. I'd issue an executive order that ended the catch and release program that the president that we currently have has engaged in. Secondly, I would deny funding to sanctuary cities. And I would ask Congress to join me in doing the same and simply say, if you're a sanctuary city and you're not going to allow us to enforce law in your city, that we can deny you. The third thing I'd do, I'd declare that drug cartels are terrorist organizations and treat them that way. I'd reverse the executive amnesty program that is illegal, that the president himself on 23 occasions had said that he didn't have the legal authority to do, and then went ahead and did it anyway because he claimed that his pen and phone were somehow magic. And the final thing I'd do is stop immigration courts from undercutting our laws and insist that they no longer would be allowed to ignore and to selectively pick those laws with which they agreed.
And what would you do with the folks that are here?
I would be very careful not to try to address that until we secure the border. Here's how I look at it. If the pipe in my kitchen breaks and I got water spewing all over the floor, it's not my first reaction to go to Home Depot and get a new sink. It's my reaction, get the water stopped. And I think before we say, what are we going to do with the 11 million or the 20 million, however many are here, what are we going to do with them? Let's ask ourselves, are we serious about securing the border? And once we do, then the second thing I do is I'd work to pass the fair tax, because the quickest way to end illegal immigration is to take the economic advantage out of it. And the fair tax, which is a tax we pay at consumption, would do that. Because if, under the current system, a person is working illegally, they're not paying payroll taxes. It's not coming out of their check. And their employer is not paying any of the payroll taxes. So there is a definite tax advantage to being illegal. But under the fair tax, when you pay at consumption, here's what happens. The illegals pay the same taxes everyone else would be paying. They would get zero benefit out of being illegal. In fact, they would be penalized because the portion of the fair tax that empowers poor people the most, which is the pre-rate that untaxes their basic necessities, only available to citizens. Therefore, if you take the advantage away and make it economically disastrous to be an illegal immigrant, then you've greatly improved the likelihood that people will not want to be illegal. They'll want to find out what does it take to be legal. And they'll do that for their own economic self-interest.
Right. Now, some members of some of your colleagues, some of your fellow contenders have denounced Donald Trump's comments regarding illegal Mexicans, saying that some illegals are murderers and rapists. He's been denounced in some quarters, and some members of the base are rallying to him. What do you think on that, Governor Huckabee? Were his words racist and offensive, or did he simply state obvious facts?
You know, I've been very careful not to comment on the other candidates, and I've been very honest in saying Donald Trump doesn't need my help in getting wind underneath his wings or to get publicity. But it's I think very it's very just difficult for me to understand why Republicans would spend our time beating up on other Republicans. Donald Trump has as much right to run as I do or anyone else. He'll make his statements. He'll stand by his statements. and he'll defend them. I'd rather focus on my own plans, and that's what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think Donald Trump is a racist, and I think anybody who would say that has never been around him. He's a plain-spoken guy, but I think if you disagree with somebody, calling them a racist is sort of a way to end a legitimate and thoughtful discussion, and that's unfortunate. Republicans have room in our party for Donald Trump, and we should be welcome to hear his views, and if we disagree with him, well, we'll disagree with him.
Right. Now, Governor, in the wake of the Supreme Court ruling on same-sex marriage, do you fear that there's going to be a wave of persecution coming against Christians who dissent from that? Christian organizations, for example, that say, well, we're not going to practice same-sex marriage. Do you think that we're going to be living soon in an era of Christian persecution? Will we become exiles in our own land?
We already are. And I know that may sound a little bold, but I met a couple in Iowa last week, the Oddguards, who lost their wedding chapel business because they've essentially been run out of business. They've been fined $5,000 because they refused to carry out same-sex weddings. If you talk to Melissa Klein, she and her husband Aaron have lost their cake business in Oregon. They've been fined $135,000 for discrimination because they are Christians and they do not believe that they should participate in making a cake for a same-sex couple. I've never seen a cake that was worth $135,000, but that's how much they've been fined. Well, that'll put them out of business. You see it in a florist in Washington State, Baron L. Stutzman at Arlene's Florist, a photographer in New Mexico at Elaine's Photography, a T-shirt maker in Kentucky who was told that he had to make T-shirts even though they were offensive to him. The list goes on and on. This is just the beginning. Christian schools, universities, hospitals, individual Christian-owned businesses, or for that matter, Muslim or Jewish-owned businesses, will be forced to accept a worldview that their conscience refuses them to accept, meaning they'll have to decide, will they obey God or will they obey the government? And that's a frightening place for an American to be.
Right. Now, you've called for civil disobedience. You've called the Supreme Court. It thinks it's acting like it's the supreme being, and we've got to stand up to that. Now, how far do we practice this civil disobedience?
Well, I think the next president, and I hope it's me because I'm the only one who is saying outright, I'll make it very clear that we've got to get back to the constitutional understanding of three equal branches of government. And the Supreme Court cannot make a law. They can review one, they can rule, but unless the Congress of elected representatives decides to enable that law through legislation, and unless the executive, the president, decides to sign it and enforce it, there is no law in force. And I think Americans need to go back to ninth grade civics, and we need to reflect upon the fact that if you allow the judiciary to act as if they are the supreme branch, in this case, the supreme being, what you've essentially done is surrender to judicial tyranny. Jefferson spoke out against this, as did Jackson. Abraham Lincoln ignored the court in the Dred Scott decision of 1857, just simply said, I'm not going to enforce it. And I know that may sound stunning to some people, but it really isn't at all. That's the check and balance that was created in the Constitution so that no one branch of government would be able to simply act and force the other two to surrender. And that's what a lot of people have advocated when the Supreme Court has a ruling and they say, well, that's it. That's the law of the land. There's nothing we can do. Well, of course there's something we can do. And it starts with simply making it clear that until the Congress agrees with that decision, we have no intention of following it.
Now, you have also issued out a statement, just switching gears completely, because you're going to, as you're telling us in this interview, you're going to get tough on the border, you're going to get tough on the Supreme Court, and as I understand it, you're going to get tough on ISIS too. You just issued a statement saying that President Obama is really still in denial about the threat we face from ISIS, and in fact, it was the void that he created in Iraq that led to the current crisis that we face there in the Middle East. Governor, what would you do about ISIS? And also tell me, looking back, do you think getting into the Iraq war was a mistake altogether? Well, the easiest thing in the world is to go back and talk about what we should have or could have done. But
presidents don't get to go back in time like Marty McFly and live Back to the Future. We have to work with the facts we have. So there's no point in speculating. Should we have done it? I think the question is, what do we do in light of the situation we're in? And here's what we have to do. America has to have the most formidable, fierce military in the history of mankind, so that when we have a threat, whether it's ISIS, Boko Haram, Al-Qaeda, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Iranians, whatever it is, we make it very clear that we plan to push back and destroy that threat to us. And we won't take 10 years doing it. We hopefully won't even take 10 months. It'll be more like a 10-day exercise, because the fierceness of our forces would mean that we can absolutely guarantee the outcome of this film. That's how America needs to operate in the world of foreign affairs and foreign policy.
Now, am I hearing boots on the ground here? Is that boots on the ground? American troops on the ground? I've been saying from the start, I've been saying almost a year now, look, we got to send the troops back in, and that's all there is to it.
We have to leave that as an option. We can't leave anything off the table. The mistake this president has made is announcing to the enemy all the things we won't do. I'd be very clear that we're going to announce to you the outcome. We win, you lose. Exactly how we do it and which levels of force we use to get it done, you'll find out when you're on the losing end of it. But we will use whatever it takes. That would include ground forces, but we would do whatever is necessary for Americans to succeed at putting down this threat and making sure that it is no longer a threat to citizens of this country.
Right. And recently, the Defense Secretary, Ash Carter, said, we've trained, check out this big number here of troops to fight in Syria, 60 instead of the 5,500 that we were promised. What is going on?
Well, this president, even when he waves the stick, he doesn't mean it, and everyone knows it. He says there's a red line. There isn't. He says we're going to arm the Kurds. We didn't. He says we're going to train the people who will defend Iraq. We don't. Nobody trusts him. Nobody. Why would they? He's never kept his word, never stood behind one of his threats, and he's put more pressure on Israel to stop building bedrooms for their families in their own neighborhoods than he has on Iran to stop building a nuclear bomb that would blow up half the Middle East and ultimately America. And this is why we need firm, clear, decisive leadership in the White House. And I'm hoping that we'll have it come January of 2017.
Indeed. Now, Governor, one final question. I know you've been so generous with your time. We're a little bit over the time that you had allotted for me, but I'm enjoying the interview. I don't know about you. I can just keep going all day. I have one final question for you, sir. Some folks say, okay, look, Huckabee is charming, he's engaging, he speaks well, and I'm on his wavelength on so many issues. But, on a couple of issues, he flip-flopped. Governor, did you flip-flop on Common Core and on Social Security?
Neither one. On Common Core, what happened was Common Core changed. It originally was a state-controlled standards for two things, and it was standards only, not curriculum. It was for math and language arts, and it was to be controlled by the state so the federal government wouldn't co-opt education policy. Well, the exact opposite happened. The federal government got its fingers all over it, tied it to things like data collection, additional subjects, curriculum, and they totally destroyed what would have been something the states would have had control over. So now I oppose it because it isn't what it was originally sold and intended to be. And Social Security, somebody said, well, I once said that we need to thank Paul Ryan for putting a plan out there, but a plan that I don't necessarily support. Look, what I said was I appreciate someone addressing the problems that clearly exist with the Social Security system that's underfunded. I didn't endorse the specifics of his plan. What I have said very clearly is the government has already lied to us and stolen from us. And the last thing we need to do is to tell people, oh, yeah, you've worked 51 years into a system, you've had your paychecks involuntarily raided by the government for Social Security and Medicare, and now that you've put that money in good faith, involuntarily, the government is going to say, we didn't really mean it, we're going to raise the age at which those benefits start to 75. We're going to take that money away from you because we're now going to means test, and you make too much money. That wasn't the deal people signed up for. And if Congress is intent on ending someone's pension, let it be their own, not some 80-year-old widow who faithfully paid in throughout her working years and was promised that if she did that, that Social Security check would be there waiting on her. I think, Dr. Grace, the last thing Republicans need to be is guilty of pulling the rug out from under working people who in good faith believe that the government would honor their commitments.
Then how would you balance the books if you're not willing to touch such a big entitlement program?
There are two ways. One, grow the economy, because you're never going to get out of the debt we're in unless we significantly and rapidly grow the economy. That's why I support the fair tax, because nothing gooses the economy as abruptly and as dramatically as moving from a tax on our productivity to simply taxing consumption. And one of the reasons the fair tax really does make a difference is because under the current tax system, the only people paying into Social Security and Medicare are the people who work for wages. Well, we know that over the past several years, fewer people get their wealth out of wages. Most of the wealth in this country comes from dividends and from capital gains, from which there is no Social Security or Medicare taxes received. Under the fair tax, all the money that's paid at the point of consumption goes into the general fund. So for the first time, you have a reliable funding stream for these programs in a vastly enhanced economic climate. So it's not going to be something done overnight or in a year or two, but there is a way to grow our way out of the economic mess we're in and get to the place where we're actually able to begin to pay down the debt and to stabilize these programs.
Mm-hmm. Well, Governor, you've been very generous with your time, and I really appreciate it. I was impressed in your speech and when you launched your presidential campaign that you put our veterans first. I used to run a section of the Washington Times which was devoted to the military community. And in this show, unfortunately, we haven't discussed issues regarding veterans, but I hope that in the future you and I can devote perhaps 15 minutes just to discussing all the ills that plague our veterans. You think that that'll be possible, Governor Huckabee?
I would love to do it because I do think it's one of the most underappreciated segments of our entire country. And if anyone deserves the first fruits of our treasury, it's our veterans. So I look forward to coming back and visiting with you about that.
Thank you very much for your time, Governor Huckabee. I want everybody to go to my article, Why Conservatives Should Take a Closer Look at Mike Huckabee. There's so much to discuss. A lot of the issues are also there in the piece. And Governor, it's been such a pleasure. This is Dr. Grace, upholding values that are never, ever going to die.
I can count on to keep me going strong. Yeah, I hold on.
The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
Welcome back. This is Dr. Grace, the editor of Politics and Culture at worldtribune.com. I don't know what finally illuminated Hillary's mind, that she should at last sit down with the press. But this week she finally gave her first interview on CNN to Breonna Keller. That's her first national interview since she launched her campaign. She has spoken to the local press in the various tours that she's done of some states. But this was her first full-fledged interview to the national press once since she has announced her candidacy. And she sat down with CNN's Breonna Keller and was asked a host of questions. And we got a couple of questions more for her. What is it that changed since the beginning of her candidacy to now? Why did she ignore the press for so long? She claimed in that interview that, she really just wanted to sit down and converse with a lot of the people that she met along the way or talk to them on the street. But I would have followed up and said, sure, you could very well have done that and then allocated some time at the end of every day or even once a week to talk to the press. I don't see how speaking to the public excludes speaking to the press. Every other candidate seems to do that. And what occurred to me was, women have always said that they wanted to be treated equally. And in her case, she is now using the gender card. She's saying, I want to be treated, I'm a woman, hear me roar, I'm going to be the first president of the United States, I'm going to be a female president of the United States, making history if I'm elected, and I deserve to stand shoulder to shoulder with the men. And yet, the rules have to be different for her. That's what I'm hearing. And my first thought was, you're kind of the poster child for anti-feminism. You're the poster child in the way you're behaving for inequality, because you're asking for special rules for you. So what's happening? There's been a huge backlash against your behavior. Why special rules for you? Why is it that for you, the press is actually cordoned off, as recently happened? The backlash certainly prompted her to finally give a full-fledged interview. And also the fact that Bernie Sanders, her opponent, one of her key opponents, is soaring now. He's surging precisely because he's accessible. He mixes with the people. He mixes with the press. In other words, he does his job the way that he's supposed to do it, the way that everybody else does it. So I didn't think that her answer in that regard was really convincing. She was asked, 6 in 10 Americans do not consider you trustworthy. Listen to this exchange.
We see in our recent poll that nearly 6 in 10 Americans say they don't believe that you're honest and trustworthy. Do you understand why they feel that way?
Well, I think when you are subjected to the kind of constant barrage of attacks that are largely fomented by and coming from the right.
But do you bear any responsibility for it?
Well, I can only tell you that I was elected twice in New York against the same kind of onslaught. I was confirmed and served as Secretary of State. And I think it's understandable that when questions are raised, people maybe are thinking about them and wondering about them. But I have every confidence that during the course of this campaign, people are going to know who will fight for them, who will be there when they need them, and that's the kind of person I am, and that's what I will do.
Well, it seems to me that you're not fighting for the people. You're not accountable to the people. The person you're fighting for is yourself. And that's the fundamental charge against the Clintons, this blinding self-centeredness. So she's saying, 6 in 10 don't consider you trustworthy. And throughout the course of that, she was asked several times, how do you account for that? And she kept insisting, people do trust me. But the question was, 6 in 10 do not. So are all of these people that are saying we don't trust you, is there something wrong with them? Are they defective? Her answer, too, that, this is a right-wing attack on her, is false. The New York Times has been covering so many of the scandals surrounding the Clinton Foundation and the emails that have recently led to this dramatic drop in trust in her. And so this idea that the problem is some kind of right-wing conspiracy, here we go again with the Clinton lingo, or that the people don't really know their own minds, I don't think the way she answered the questions did her any good. Because again, she comes across as someone who is totally wrapped up in herself. And everyone says it because it's as clear as day. Slippery Hillary. The dishonesty was obvious for everybody. Dodge questions or deceive. She was asked about the controversy over the emails. Why do you have a private email account? Why did you set up a private server? And what happened with all the emails that you deleted? Roll it.
I just am trying to understand some of the thought process behind it. One former state attorney general, a Democrat, told CNN that they know of no lawyer who would advise someone, a client, facing the kind of scrutiny that you've been facing to wipe their server. I mean, what do you say to that?
Well, what I say to that is I turned over everything I was obligated to turn over, and then I moved on. People delete their personal emails, their work-related emails, whatever emails they have, on a regular basis. I turned over everything that I could imagine. Now, sitting in a meeting in the State Department and asking for iced tea may not rise to the level of negotiating peace, but I went above and beyond. That's why there's 55,000 pages of my emails. And so I think people have an interesting time behind the scenes. And all I can tell you is that the law, the regulation did not in any way stand in my way.
You know, again, it's one lie after the other. First of all, it's true that people generally delete their own emails, their private emails. But I rarely hear of people wiping away their server clean. I rarely hear of that unless you've got something to hide. And especially if the emails are controversial, they're being requested by the American government. And suddenly you wipe your server clean. That's why she asked very astutely, no lawyer would advise you to do that. And then she says, well, I turned over everything. We know that that's not true. Sidney Blumenthal, her aide and assistant, one that she kept off the books because President Obama didn't want him working. He was subpoenaed by Congress to testify, and he turned over a batch of emails showing that there was a correspondence between them, and there were emails there that she had not turned over. So this leads us to ask, how many others are there that you haven't turned over that were relevant, that weren't just your personal yoga routine or your correspondence on Chelsea's wedding, that were relevant? And she keeps saying, I didn't break any rules. She broke the very rules that she, as Secretary of State, was enforcing. She sent out a cable to her staff saying, hey, everybody, cut it out. Stop using private emails. Correspondence has to be on government emails, email accounts. So she knew there were regulations in place. But again, those are regulations for the other people, not for her. The rules don't apply to her. That's the anti-feminist way of campaigning. We're equal, but we're not really equal. And then I thought there was a segment of the interview that was really an admission that I don't know if she wanted to make. The press hasn't really picked up on it. But listen to this when she was asked specifically about the Clinton Foundation. She was asked, are you going to keep it even if you become president? What are your thoughts going forward, given that there's been so many questions raised about it, especially the obvious question that you're in a conflict of interest running the foundation and serving the public trust? Listen to what she said about the foundation. Roll it.
If you are president, what will happen to the Clinton Foundation? Have you thought about perhaps shutting it down?
Well, let me start by saying I am so proud of the Clinton Foundation. I am proud of the work that my husband started, that my daughter continued. I'm proud of the very small role I played in being there for about a year and a half. And I'll give you an example of why what the Clinton Foundation has done is so critical. When I became Secretary of State, the United States government was using our tax dollars to treat 1.7 million people around the world with HIV/AIDS. I looked at the contracts that the Clinton Foundation had been negotiating to buy medicine and pass it through, working with foreign governments who provided the funding to buy the medicine to treat more people. So we negotiated lower prices. By the time I left, thanks to contracts and work that the Clinton Foundation had done, the United States was treating 5.1 million people. That's just one example. Now, maybe it's because my husband knows so many people in the world and he's so creative and he's so smart, but he was able to put together solutions to problems, whether it was HIV/AIDS or childhood obesity in our country or expanding farm productivity.
Whoa, did you hear what I heard? she basically admitted there, and this is going to be the subject of my next article, that she, as Secretary of State, was working very closely with her husband while he headed up the Clinton Foundation. She was looking at contracts that he had negotiated with foreign governments, and she used some of that knowledge, some of that information, some of those resources to help her in her work as Secretary of State. Now, the follow-up question there should have been, and did you send all of those emails? Those specific emails, even, you see, she thinks that the press is going to give her a big pat on the back on this one. Oh, my goodness, you were helping. You were helping on the whole issue of AIDS and helping people deal with this epidemic. You're a philanthropist. You're not a crook. You're a philanthropist. That's what she wants the headlines to be. But in reality, the key follow-up question would be, okay, so did you submit, and are we going to get a chance to review, all of the email correspondence between you and your husband discussing how you were going to help the American government help others around the world with AIDS? Do we have that evidence? Do we have that? And that, I am wondering, will it surface? And also, there's a key admission there. There was close collaboration between Hillary Clinton working as Secretary of State and the Clinton Foundation. They were working closely together. They were not each on their own trajectory. They were working hand in glove. Hillary's own words. Much, much more to come on that, I guarantee it. And let's just conclude this by unpacking the series of lies. Not just by what Dr. Grace is saying, but other key people have said about Hillary Clinton's email scandal. Listen to House Speaker Boehner saying in April, shortly after she'd announced her candidacy, that she did indeed violate so many of the key rules that were in place. Roll it.
What is your observation to Hillary officially announcing?
Well, what's she going to do for America? That's the real question. It's not about personalities. I think that the fact that she won't turn over her server, the fact that she's ignored the law when it comes to how she was supposed to communicate as the Secretary of State, those questions are going to continue to haunt her until she comes clean, until some independent third party that goes through these emails and determines which ones are public and which ones are clearly private.
It doesn't seem like she's going to allow that. I mean, do you think that really a third party, independent party, will get that server?
I don't know that she could stonewall this for the next year and a half.
Well, she's trying, and the questions will not go away. And the chairman of the House Select Committee on Benghazi, Trey Gowdy, came forward and said, well, wait a minute, she did lie in that interview. There are subpoenas that have been issued for those emails. Roll it, Brittany.
Well, she certainly had a subpoena. When you lie suggest an intent to deceive, I can't imagine whatever intent she could possibly have. I try not to use the word lie. I can certainly tell you this. It is a fact that there was a subpoena issued to her in March of 2015. But Congressman, it's also a fact that there was a subpoena in existence from another congressional committee far before that one. So there are two subpoenas, there are letters from Congress, and there is a statutory obligation to her to preserve public records.
In other words, he's trying to be delicate. He's got some, legal requirements to be able to be careful with his use of language. We here in American Heartland, we can speak plainly. He was saying her testimony at CNN, what she said to Breonna Keller, is clearly at odds with the facts. In other words, she's lying. Bold-faced liar. And so we end this segment by asking the key question. She's running to be the first female president of the United States while using a double standard. all the rules that apply to men, rules dictated by the American government, rules dictated, say, just by the way that a campaign is generally run, all of that, it doesn't apply to her. So I really, 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 really want to be equal, except, of course, when I don't. This is Dr. Grace, upholding values that will never, ever die.
Stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
It's that time in the broadcast where every week we look around the country for someone who has said something totally out of line. This week it is former President Jimmy Carter. He is doing the television and radio circuit. He's promoting his latest book. And he was asked in an interview about the current controversy regarding same-sex marriage. What are his thoughts? And listen to this.
Would Jesus approve gay marriage?
I believe he would. I believe Jesus would. I don't know how. I don't have any verse in Scripture.
No. But I just intuitively, yeah. No.
I believe that Jesus would approve gay marriage, but I'm not. That's just my own personal belief. Yes. Yeah. I think Jesus would encourage any kind of love affair if it was honest and sincere, and was not damaging to anyone else. And I don't see that gay marriage damages anyone.
How about gay marriage?
That's no problem with me. You know, I think everybody should have a right to get married, regardless of their sex. And the only thing I would draw a line on, I wouldn't be in favor of the government being able to force a local church congregation to perform gay marriages if they did want to.
All right. So he basically says there that without any biblical support, without any verse in Scripture, he just intuitively believes that Jesus himself would support gay marriage. This is an outrageous statement. And I was thinking about this at great length. Why would he say that when it is really well known that there are very strict rules in the Bible about sexual conduct, even sexual conduct between man and woman? For example, premarital sex itself is denounced. It's not considered the chaste life. It's so well known. Why would he say that? Well, it's obvious that what we're seeing in America today is our founding documents, whether they're the Bible or the Constitution, they're being disregarded. And if we have a country now where the Supreme Court can just make up rights that they perceive in our Constitution, why then cannot a believer like Jimmy Carter, he's a Christian believer, he's a born-again Christian, Baptist, why then cannot he simply make up his own interpretation of the Bible, even as regards this key institution that has been considered sacred for centuries? Why can't he do it? If the Supreme Court can make up law, why is it that he, as a Christian and Baptist, can't just make up what Jesus would support today? It's obvious that there's a correlation here. Our Constitution and our Bible are under assault every day, and we are now wading in the swamps of moral relativism. You can make it up as you go along. And what Jimmy Carter said is outrageous. There is clearly in the Bible a verse, for example, Matthew 19, 4-6. Jesus defines marriage as the union between a man and a woman joined together by God. That is based in Scripture. Anything else is a figment of his imagination. And therefore, with all due respect, Jimmy Carter, just shut up. And now we go to our grab bag. You know I like to end this show on an upbeat note. The tide of public opinion is turning. Donald Trump has been under assault even by members of his own party for saying what many people believe in the grassroots of our movement is just the plain truth. Within this wave of illegal immigrants, there are also criminals, and we need to stop this mess on our border because it is dangerous to the American people as well as it threatens our sovereignty. You know, the tide of public opinion is turning, and how do we see that? Well, on this very broadcast, Governor Huckabee said Trump is not a racist for saying what he said. He's entitled to his opinion. In addition, the founder and editor of the Weekly Standard, Bill Kristol, in an interview with Newsmax, said this.
Not only has it gone that far, if anything, I'd say Trump, who starts off with big negatives, obviously. Most Republican voters don't think he should be the next presidential candidate. But so far, Trump is the opposite of Aiken. Aiken was an established congressman who made an idiot of himself. Trump is an outsider who is saying some things that the establishment doesn't want to hear that is resonating with voters. And his most controversial thing was obviously a statement about some of the immigrants, illegal immigrants from Mexico, which was crudely stated, and I think it appropriately stated, and I certainly would join in saying he shouldn't have said it. Having said that, it's not ridiculous to be concerned about crimes committed by illegal immigrants and about whether our federal policies are sending those people back or keeping those people in jail the way we should be. And the idea that that's going to be an embarrassment to the Republican Party, that Trump is raising that issue, when President Obama and his administration have purposefully cut back on the deportations and tolerated the sanctuary cities and so forth, I don't think Trump hurts the Republican Party in that respect.
All right. There we go. The founder and editor of the Weekly Standard, Bill Kristol, saying no, his comments don't hurt the party. And then former Arizona Governor Jan Brewer also weighed in. Roll it.
Well, I believe that Mr. Trump is kind of telling it like it really truly is, you know, being the governor of the gateway of illegal immigration. For 6 years, we had to deal with a lot of things, and I think that the people of Arizona realize that we pick up the tab for the majority of the violence that comes across our border in regards to the drug cartels, the smugglers, the drop houses. It has been horrendous, and of course they come through Arizona and therefore end up in other states. So they
you
go
think
throughout
he's right?
the country.
You think he's
and
right?
And it is. Well, no, I think everybody knows that he's right in regards to that they're coming across our border. You know, we have incarceration dollars owed to us by the federal government for.
You know, there you go. So you've got Jan Brewer now saying people know that he's right. He's speaking the truth. And at the same time, as the tide is turning, you have Reince Priebus telling Donald Trump, you know what? Just watch that tone, Donald. Watch that tone. The tone is working. The tone is one of, we're upset about this situation because we care about the American people. And his tone is so effective that, in fact, he is now, in a recent poll, at the top of the polls nationally. That tells you that the people are sick and tired of political correctness. We want somebody that can cut right through the culture smog with their words. And that is what Donald Trump is doing. He's taking on the culture smog as well as the establishment in the media and within the Republican Party. And he's winning. He's winning because he's saying plainly and clearly what people on the streets say. He's using their language. Donald Trump doesn't have to change his tone. In fact, it's the other way around. Bill Kristol was even saying, you know what? Let's look at what Trump is doing that is working, and let's imitate that. So he's gone within a matter of 2 weeks from being possibly the pariah of the Republican Party, according to the establishment, to now the one that we should imitate. Bill Kristol said, you know what? He's tapping into nationalist fervor. He's tapping into the frustration of the middle class. We got to take a good look at what he's doing that's working. And this is an example of how when the people stand behind someone who is speaking the truth, we can get victories here and there. Kudos to Donald Trump for being forthright in his language and sticking to his guns. And now it looks like his party, some of the leading members of our punditry class, are singing an entirely different tune. This is Dr. Grace, the editor of Politics and Culture at WorldTribune.com. Thank you for joining us. And every week, I do my best to uphold values that will never, ever die.
The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.